So now that I have my episodic memory framework and I have all the necessary pieces of information that I've extracted from the original piece of content, what I can do is I can review it, which is actually the most important thing. Everything leads up to this moment. Most modern languages are estimated to have vocabularies ranging in the hundreds of thousands of words. If you're learning a language, you will need to find a way to commit anywhere from a few hundred to a few thousand of those words to memory. That sounds like a lot of work, and it is, but I know a secret that has helped me build a large vocabulary in over a dozen languages without taking up too much of my time and too much of my energy. A secret that can help you do exactly the same for your own target language. Hi, I'm Luca Lampariello. I'm a language coach who speaks 14 languages, and on this channel, I help people learn foreign languages faster, more efficiently, and in a fun way. Let's dive right in. So, what's the recipe for building a huge vocabulary in a foreign language? Before you can get started, you need three things. 1, a portable notebook and something to write with. 2, authentic target language content that's well suited to your level. And 3, my 6 rules for memorizing new vocabulary. Okay, I know. That's 8 things. But the first 2 are relatively easy, all things considered. All you have to do is grab a small notebook like this and some good content in your target language. How to get good target language content is a topic for another video, but for the sake of simplicity, let me just make a few quick recommendations. For beginners, I recommend content from Asimov's With Ease coursebooks or innovative Language Pod 101 or Class 101 series. For intermediate learners, I recommend any short podcast or YouTube video that catches your interest. Once you have your notebook and your content, you can then just get into the meat of memorization, my 6 rules for remembering words in any language. These rules are: mark, highlight, or underline what you want to remember. Transfer the most important expressions into your notebook. Store just enough expressions to remember the gist of the content. Connect stored expressions to the context in which they were learned. Translate the expressions into your native language and review your notebook regularly. Rule number 1, mark, highlight, or underline what you want to remember. When I go through a piece of content in my target language, be it an article, dialogue, or even the script of a podcast or video, the first thing I do is mark, highlight, or underline any word or phrase that seems interesting to me or particularly relevant to my life. Here's what that looks like in practice. So I have here in front of me the audio and the text of a podcast for people who want to learn German. This is a fantastic resource for people who have, let's say, an A2 level, but the language doesn't matter. What I want to show you is how I mark interesting words and sentences within a certain piece of content. Now, I'm showing you the setup, so pencil, highlighter, text, audio, and computer, anti-stress ball, and pencil sharpener, water, and coffee, just for the sake of presenting the normal setup. But for the sake of this video, I'm going to show you how I mark these words, and I'm not gonna play the audio, I'm just gonna read through, I'm gonna translate into English, and then I'm going to show you what words I normally take into account and mark and how I do that. So, without further ado, let's get started. Klimaschutz in der Disco. So, this is the title of the podcast. Protection of the environment, literally, this means in a club or in clubs. So Berlin is bekannt für seine Clubszene. Berlin is known for its club scene. Okay, this is interesting, but I don't feel like marking any word here. Jetzt wollen Politiker dafür sorgen, dass die Clubs der Hauptstadt grüner werden. Now, politicians want to make sure that the clubs of the capital become greener. So in this case, dafür sorgen, dass, so make sure that, this is interesting. So first I put them in parentheses, as you've seen here, and then I create, let's say, a connection. Again, I'm using a pencil, and I'm gonna write here, make sure that. I find this a very interesting and useful expression, so I just marked it. So, next, eine Idee ist zum Beispiel eine Tanzfläche, die beim Tanzen Strom erzeugt. An idea, or one idea, is, for example, a Tanzfläche, dancing floor. Tanz means tanz, or tanzen means to dance. Fläche is surface. So that's dancing floor, die beim Tanzen Strom erzeugt. That, while dancing, generates electricity. Strom, current. This is literally Strom is current. So I like Strom erzeugt. Okay, so you see how far I've put this here. This is for reasons that you will see also in other videos. Strom erzeugt. I'm using this space, all this blank space on the page to add more information. So generate electricity. Then you have jährlich kommen tausende Touristen aus dem In- und Ausland in die deutsche Hauptstadt Berlin. Every year, thousands of tourists come aus dem In- und Ausland, so both from Germany, inside of Germany, and from abroad, in die deutsche Hauptstadt Berlin. Maybe Ausland, abroad. I can write it here. Abroad. This I put it just next to it. Viele wollen vor allem die bekannten Sehenswürdigkeiten besuchen und etwas über die Geschichte der Stadt lernen. Many people want, especially, the known Sehenswürdigkeiten. This is a very long word. This means basically sites or places of interest, interesting places within the, within a certain place. Besuchen. So I'm just going to write besuchen means to visit. So to visit sites. It's an interesting word here. Und etwas über die Geschichte der Stadt lernen. And to learn something about the history of the city. Andere kommen wegen der vielen verschiedenen Ausgehmöglichkeiten am Abend nach Berlin. Others come because of the many various. Ausgeh means to go out. Möglichkeiten means possibilities. So basically, this means possibilities of going out, nightlife possibilities. Am Abend. In the evening, nach Berlin, to Berlin. And here, this is interesting. Ausgehmöglichkeiten, So I'm just going to write here, night life possibilities. Die Clubszene dort ist international bekannt und sehr beliebt. The club scene there is internationally known. And this literally means very appreciated, very liked. Doch die Diskos sind nicht gerade umweltfreundlich. Im Gegenteil. But, however, the clubs are not exactly umweltfreundlich. Environment, this is Umwelt, environment, freundlich, friendly. So environmental friendly, ecological, I would say. Im Gegenteil means to the contrary. So here you get an idea how I go through a text and I just mark words or interesting sentences. Here is marked just one word, single word, Ausland, abroad. Here is dafür sorgen, das, to make sure that. And of course, if you want to, you can always use, for example, a highlighter. So you can highlight this, you can highlight this, you can highlight this, etc., etc. This is how I mark a text. And as you can see, we have 1, 2, 3, let's say 2, 3 expressions per paragraph. And again, let's say that I abide by the criteria of what is relevant for me, what is interest, what piques my interest within this piece of content. Rule number 2, transfer the most important expressions into your notebook. After I've marked, highlighted, or underlined all of the expressions that I think I want to remember, I then take a subset of those expressions and transfer them into my portable language learning notebook. To be more specific, I distill my list of expressions down to the most useful words and phrases, and then write them down in the notebook. Let's see how this works in practice. So once I've marked all the expressions and the words that I find interesting and relevant within this piece of content, the next step is to transfer these pieces of information into my notebook. And as you can see here, my notebook is pretty small compared with the side of my hand, and I gave it here a title. So you have here a label, I put here German, and then it opens like a book. You can see here the first page. I normally leave it blank, and then I have this structure. We have this structure here. So we have on the left, I can put some pieces of information, a given amount, and a certain specific type of information, and on the right, another kind of information. And as you will see in a second, I will show you how I transfer the notes, what kind of notes I transfer, and how I structure them into this notebook. Another important thing to take into account, again, is that I find this very visually pleasant. I really like this kind of notebook here, from the cover to the inside, and as you can see, it's small enough that it can fit in my pocket. So I tend to choose things that are portable, and I tend to take this with me, carry this with me all the time. So step number 3, I'm going to transfer now all the content into this small notebook, and again, I'm going to select the pieces of content that I find interesting. Now, I'm not going to select all of them, just a part of them, but I want to make sure that they're dense enough so that I can reconstruct the meaning and the gist of this piece of content by reading just the notes from this notebook. I'm going to leave a space here, and I'm going to explain to you why in a little bit. So without further ado, let's get started. The first thing that I want to write is Politiker wollen dafür sorgen. Politiker wollen dafür sorgen, which means politicians want to make sure that. Then the second one that I'm going to choose is Strom erzeugen. To generate electricity. Jährlich kommen tausende Touristen aus dem In- und Ausland in die deutsche Hauptstadt. I can write Touristen kommen aus dem Ausland. So tourists come from abroad. Bekannten Sehenswürdigkeiten besuchen. Bekannten Sehenswürdigkeiten besuchen. To visit well-known places of interest or sites. Ausgehmöglichkeiten. So here I can write verschiedene Ausgehmöglichkeiten. So various night life options. Möglichkeiten literally means possibilities. Nach Angaben, according to, here we have so viel Strom, but again, I just marked Strom erzeugen, so I'm just going to skip that. Anbieten, I'm going to skip it. Energiesparende Technik benutzen, I'm going to skip that. Wasserverbrauch senken. to reduce the amount of water. Actually, this means Verbrauch is the use of water, more than amount, but that's okay. And then I'm gonna continue, and I'm just gonna write a couple of other things here. The notes that I jotted down are dense enough that they help me reconstruct the sequence of ideas within this piece of content. So if I go from the first expression to the last that I jotted down here, I should get a good idea of how the content flows. And that's also the reason why I decided to put, for example, a subject here. Instead of just saying dafür sorgen dass, I just wrote Politiker wollen dafür sorgen. So politicians want to make sure that, because the subject is going to help me reconstruct the idea. It's always a good idea to have, for most of these pieces of information, a subject to reconstruct the idea. So here I have politicians are making sure that, generate electricity, tourists come from abroad to visit known sites, various nightlife options. According to this, I like this expression. Doesn't have a noun here, but it doesn't matter. This leaves a little bit of flexibility for when I want to reconstruct, for example, a piece of content. Reduce the use of water, sustainable dancing floor to save energy, gets financial support. I remember I didn't even write financial, but I know that this is get financial support, reach many people, become a model. Rule number 3, store just enough expressions to remember the gist of the content. When you're choosing which important expressions to store in your notebook, it's beneficial to store just the right amount of expressions, neither too many nor too few. How can we determine the right amount of expressions for a piece of content? You need to store just enough expressions so that when you review them later, you're able to recall the gist or main ideas of the entire piece of content. I like to refer to this as density. If your selection of stored expressions is appropriately dense, it contains the cues necessary to help you remember most of the concepts contained in your text, podcast, or YouTube video. Appropriately dense notes also help you remember the sequence of ideas within the piece of content. If you can go from your first expression to your last and get a good idea of how the content flowed, then you're done a fantastic job, and we'll remember these expressions much more easily. Let me show you what dense notes look like. The next step is to transfer a portion of the pieces of information that I deem important, relevant, and interesting from this piece of content into my notebook. Now, I'm going to leave a space here, and you will understand why in a little bit, and I'm going to transfer some of these pieces of information into my notebook. So, for example, Politiker wollen dafür sorgen, dass. Politicians want to make sure that. Strom erzeugen, to generate electricity. Touristen, tourists, come aus dem Ausland. They come from abroad. Tourists come from abroad. Bekannten, known. Sehenswürdigkeiten besuchen. To visit known places of interest or sites. Ausgehmöglichkeiten, nightlife options, and I can add here verschiedenen too, various. Then I have nach Angaben here, which sounds interesting. According to. So viel Strom, this is a piece of content I'm going to skip because I already have Strom erzeugen. Then Anbietern, I'm going to skip that one as well. Energiesparende Technik also, I'm going to skip that. Again, I'm just jotting down a portion. Wasserverbrauch senken, so to reduce the consumption of water. This is interesting for me. Nachhaltige Tanzfläche. Nachhaltige Tanzfläche. So this means sustainable dancing floor. So I'm going to write that. Energiequelle genutzt werden. This I'm going to skip. Die Energie sparen. This is interesting for me. Die Energie sparen, to save energy. Finanzielle Unterstützung bekommen. Unterstützung bekommen. Viele Leute erreichen, to reach a lot of people. And then aktiv zu werden, to become active, and ein Vorbild zu werden, to become a model. Rule number 4, connect stored expressions to the context in which they were learned. One problem most people face when writing down words and phrases to remember is that when they look at their notes later, they cannot actually remember where any of this information came from. Our memories are built like networks, so if you can keep the expressions you're learning well connected to the context in which you learned those expressions, you'll have a powerful way to recall them whenever you need to. Let me show you how I keep my expressions connected to their contexts. Remember that a very important principle when it comes to then reviewing these words is that the words and the expressions that you jot down here should be dense enough so that you can reconstruct the gist of the piece of content from where these pieces of information were originally extracted. That's also one of the reasons why, for example, instead of just writing wollen dafür sorgen, dass, they want to make sure that I also added politica, because if, say, I review this in a month, I will not remember who were doing what if I don't add exactly the noun that this expression or this verb refers to. So remember that you want to transfer enough pieces of content, not too many, otherwise this becomes pretty heavy, but at the same time you want to make sure that they're dense enough and they have the quality that you need in order to reconstruct the gist of the original piece of content that you extracted them from. Another very important principle in order to make this kind of exercise and this notebook very noteworthy and worthwhile is to add context. So if you take a look at these pieces of content, say 3 months from now, you're going to be asking yourself, what do these pieces of content refer to? So here, a simple action that you can do is to add and give a title. So you can just write, for example, here, Klimaschutz in der Disco, and then you can also write maybe the source, Deutsche Welle, and if you want, you can write a date here. And this gives very valuable context. I call this episodic memory framework because it gives you a framework which is going to help your episodic memory. Where did you extract these from and when did this happen? This, I can assure you, is really, really good when it comes to memorizing and in general committing pieces of content that you extract into your long-term memory. Rule number 5, translate the expressions into your native language. If you look at my notebook here, you will notice that it opens horizontally with 1 page on the left and 1 page on the right. This is a deliberate choice. Having 2 pages of notes next to each other like this makes it useful to practice my next rule, which involves translating my stored expressions into my native language. Here's an example from my own notebook. The reason why I choose notebooks that have the structure is that I can put not only the pieces of information in my target language, but also in my native language. So I can add the translation of all these pieces of content on the right side so that I have a bird's eye view of pretty much everything that I extracted from this piece of content. So let me translate these sentences sentence by sentence. Rule number 6, review your notebook regularly. Once you've stored all of your notes according to the previous rules, you'll have reached the most important step of the process, actually reviewing everything you wrote down. This might sound boring, but it's absolutely essential. If you don't review your stored expressions regularly, you will never remember them reliably enough to actually use them. And if you cannot use them, then, well, what's the point? Here's how I use my notebooks to review the expressions I write down in my target languages. So now that I have my episodic memory framework and I have all the necessary pieces of information that I've extracted from the original piece of content, what I can do is I can review it, which is actually the most important thing. Everything leads up to this moment. The bulk of the work has been done before, but now that you have all these pieces of content, you have so many creative ways in which you can review. For example, here you can see, well, you can feel how light it is and how small it is. So I can hold it with my left hand or with my right hand. I can put it here. I can simply read this out loud. For example, let me give you an example. Politiker wollen dafür sorgen, dass. Maybe you can even add something here if you want to. Strom erzeugen. You can add here a noun if you want to, or you can form a sentence out of this piece of content, which is a frame, which is just a phrase. Generate electricity. So you could add, for example, dancing floor generates electricity. Touristen kommen aus dem Ausland. Tourists come from abroad. So you can just simply read them out loud. You can read them and complete them. You can add more things. That's the reason why it's very important that you don't write simple words, but you don't write long, complete sentences. You want to keep it, keep these phrases short enough so that you have flexibility and you can play around. You can see that they're dense enough so you can reconstruct the whole story. You can reconstruct the original piece of content. Or you can also, for example, given the fact that you have the text in your native language here, this is, of course, in English, I wrote it in English, but whatever your native language is, you can cover the part in your target language, and by reading these, you can try to reconstruct, you can try to remember, actually this is called recall, you can try to recall what these sentences are. And there are also a lot of other really creative and cool ways in which you can use these pieces of content in order to self-talk. And I will talk about this in another video. And this is also one of the most powerful techniques I've developed in the last years, and it is in my Overcoming the Intermediate Plateau course, and students love it. That's it. These are the rules I follow to memorize words in any language. If you put these to use, you'll be well on your way to memorizing as many words as you need to. Let's recap everything I talked about. First, grab a notebook and some quality language learning content. After that, follow my 6 powerful rules for memorizing words. Mark, highlight, or underline what you want to remember. Transfer the most important expressions into your notebook. Store just enough expressions to remember the gist of the content. Connect stored expressions to the context in which they were learned. Translate the expressions into your native language. And review your notebook regularly. If you'd like more information about how I incorporate memorization into my language learning routine, including super cool ways to use your stored notes for speaking practice, then I recommend checking out the second course in my Become a Master Language Learner series, titled Overcoming the Intermediate Plateau. I've left the link about it down in the description box. Thanks for watching, and as always, happy language learning.